myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. And that was Acts 24:16. Of course, that was Paul. The scripture reading for the lesson today is 1 Kings 22:2 through 10, although I found that throughout these lessons, there's references several times to many other verses that they don't give you all here, I guess for reasons of space and the briefness of they can only give you so much in the text. And it came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said unto his servants, Know ye that Ramoth in Gilead is ours, and we be still, and take it not out of the hand of the king of Syria. And he said unto Jehoshaphat, Wilt thou go with me to battle Ramoth Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as thou art, my people as thy people, and my horses as thy horses. And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, Inquire, I pray thee, at the word of the Lord today. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said unto them, Shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, Go up, for the Lord shall deliver it to the hand of the king. Jehoshaphat wasn't quite comfortable with that. So he goes on, he presses the king a little bit, and he says, And Jehoshaphat said, Is there not a prophet of the Lord besides, that we might inquire of him? And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, There is yet one man, Micaiah, the son of Imlah, by whom we may inquire of the Lord, but I hate him. For he doth not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. And Jehoshaphat said, Let not the king say so. Then the king of Israel called an officer and said, Hasten hither, Micaiah, the son of Imlah. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, sat each on his throne, having put on their robes, in a void space at the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets prophesied before them. Now, I think it's important to know that Jehoshaphat said, Is there not a prophet by whom we may inquire of the Lord? These other ones said, Go up, the Lord shall deliver it. But they were not prophets of the Lord. They were false prophets. They were, if you wanted to put it this way, they were yes men. They always told the king what he wanted to hear. They were yes men. They were just token prophets. They were lame duck prophets, if you would. They had no real power, no real authority with God. And they were appointed. Who needed 400 prophets when throughout the Old Testament we see that one prophet, Elijah, and so on and so forth, where it was more than enough, one man. God is not going to assign 400 prophets. And why? Because that could be a very confusing thing. You know, if you got 400 people. Now, in this case, it wasn't, because they all said, yeah, yes, you know. So I hesitate to say this, but perhaps they were afraid to say no, afraid of what would happen if they contradicted the king's wishes. So they were just telling him what he wanted to hear, basically. Tickling their ears, as it would say. Telling him what he wanted to hear. So Jehoshaphat says, Listen, but is there another one? And there is, of course, what he was looking for was the truth. I believe God revealed to him that these men are not speaking of the Lord God. So, in this passage, we meet a prophet of God that is not as well known as men as Elijah or Elisha, yet he was a courageous man of God. Micaiah was a prophet in Israel who was known to Ahab as a true messenger of God. It is evident that Ahab, one of Israel's most wicked kings, had heard that Micaiah on numerous occasions, and found that he never gave in to the pressure of the false prophets all around him, but firmly held true to the words of the one true God, Jehovah. Using this captivating account, we see Micaiah as representing the God-given conscience that is placed in everyone to give accurate guidance through the life, determining right from wrong. So, and that's when we're straying aside, when we're sinning, we're not doing God's will. We know, you know it. That's called the conscience. You know it. You know you're not right. But oftentimes, as it speaks in this lesson, the conscience can be overridden. Overridden by want, overridden by lust, overridden by desire, overridden by material things, the seeking after material things, the seeking after of earthly pleasures. The conscience is there, but God does not have us as robots. He has us with a free will. And that's overriding that conscience, is exercising that free will, not always to the best, though. It is our goal to see in this account concerning the prophet Micaiah lessons in regard to the conscience of mankind. Have you ever read the paper or heard the news and found yourself shocked by what someone has done? We're living in a time of unbelievable violence and perversion. I don't know when this was printed, but I can tell you right now, I think you could perversion and sin squared, times 2 or whatever, or 10. Perversion, people seem to have no conscience. Criminals commit horrible crimes and feel no remorse. People live immoral lives and feel no shame. You got to listen to that nagging little voice. You know it's not right, then don't do it. Yes, sister. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's God given. Yes, it is. That's true. And something else, it brings something else to mind. How many times have you seen these mug shots? They call them mug shots, police, shots of, when they take their film, take their picture, like this and like that. So, and they're sitting there and they're smiling. They're smiling. Whether it be a murder, whether it be a robbery, whether it be any crime, and they're smiling. I told my son many, many times throughout his younger life. Sometimes I told him in his older life too. People do things wrong. People break the law because they never think of the consequences. Never think of the consequences. And that's that conscience being put to sleep, where they push it back. So, anyway, we're living in a time of unbelievable violence and perversion. In our study text, we have a perfect example of the working of the conscience and how it may be treated. The conscience often sounds on a lonely warning while everyone around is clamoring. There's nothing wrong with that. The conscience also is often ignored and overridden, but always to detriment. So here you find it, just what it says here. Everyone around is clamoring. There's nothing wrong with that. These 400 prophets are saying, hey, it's fine. You got this. Go, go, go. And so Jehoshaphat, to his credit, said, I want to hear one more. So here we go. Ahab is notorious among kings of Israel for his gross wickedness and idolatry. He was an evil king, yet God had been merciful and given him a chance to have total victory over Syria in Kings 1 and 20. We read how Benadad, the king of Syria, demanded that Ahab give him all the treasures of Israel. Ahab, at the council of his elders, refused to do so. Notice he didn't say the council of his prophets. He said the council of his elders. And came to besiege Syria. Syria then came to besiege and attack Samaria, but God sent a prophet to Ahab and promised him victory. Israel went out against Syria and slew the Syrians with a great slaughter. However, Ben-Hadad escaped, and 1 year later, he again brought his army against Israel. God sent a prophet once again to Ahab and promised Israel victory. God gave victory again, but Ben-Hadad persuaded Ahab to make a covenant with him instead of killing him. We've seen that several times throughout the Old Testament. When God is, he's very absolute in his judgments. And he's looking at these evil people, and even though Ahab was evil, the decision was made, wipe them out. And you see that many times throughout the Old Testament. God commands that king, that army, that general, whoever it may be, to save nothing. Sometimes it meant women, children, horses, cattle, sheep. It did not matter. You're not to leave a breath in anything. And we see that many times throughout the Old Testament. This was another example of that. And what happened? He did not obey. Do not discipline. When God sends a distinct message to you, it's not an option. It's not either or. It's not I'd rather. Do it, period. And we see the consequences of that throughout the Old Testament when those kings that disobeyed or those people that disobeyed were given no quarter. So moving on. God was very angry and sent word to Ahab because he had not obeyed in destroying the enemy. He would not live to continue as king. And we see that fulfilled farther down. Ahab, 3 years of peace, feeling pretty confident, desires to regain Ramoth-Gilead, which had lost to Syria in the battle. So with the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat came to visit him, brought up the subject. Don't you think he had that in the back of his mind the whole time? As soon as he gets here, I'm going to ask for help. He might have even invited him. Hey, come on down. We'll share some food and good time. And he's thinking in the back of his head, oh yeah, by the way, I want you as an ally. I need you as an ally. So the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, came to visit with him. He brought up the subject and asked Jehoshaphat he would join him in for the battle. Jehoshaphat wholeheartedly agreed to join with Ahab and offered not only his services, but the service of all his host, men and horses. So, did not do right. You see this throughout the Old Testament, and he was regarded as a king that was very evil. So, throughout the Old Testament, if you read all about these kings, you will see the same sort of progression. One will say, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. Destroying the idols, forbidding, not tearing down the groves, so on and so forth, tearing down the monuments. He did it. And then the next one, it seems like that we could have not a long progression of that before the next one. He did not do right in the sight of the Lord. So you have this up and down thing constantly going on of evil and good throughout the Old Testament, especially regarding to kings. Jehoshaphat is described in 1 Kings as a king that did which was right in the eyes of the Lord. So we have two different styles of kings here. One is obedient to God, one is not. He was different from Ahab in that he had not rebelled against God to follow idols. Now before they gather, the armies go and prepare for battle. Jehoshaphat has a request. He wants to inquire of the Lord. How important it is to seek the guidance and counsel of the Lord before we make and execute our own plans. So you often make a decision without God's advice or counsel. Let's put it this way. We make a decision sometimes without addressing God, without looking to God for an answer for that. And we do that all the time. But in reality, even in the small decisions, shouldn't we seek God's counsel in that? Shouldn't we bring those up to the Lord? So a lot of times we won't. It may be a large decision, a marriage, a house, a car, a job change, a transfer, a move, whatever, any large decisions like that. We don't often do that. And sometimes we make those decisions on our own without seeking God. Hey, Kevin's preaching today to Kevin, okay? And we learn to regret it. So I would encourage us, Kevin included, as well as the rest of us here, if we come up against a decision in our lives, something that's meaningful, and even something small sometimes, Lord, what do you think? Should I go? And sometimes that means tarrying a little bit. waiting a little bit on God. Maybe, like the angel told him, he said, listen, we heard you. I was busy. I was tied up, okay? We may not get that answer in the next 5 seconds that we want to get it in, okay? It might take 5 days. But seek the Lord in these decisions. So we seek God's will in every area of our lives. We often think of God's will only in connection with the call to the ministry. This is a serious misconception. God's will relates to all we do and every decision that we make. Anyone who buys a home, makes a career change or a choice or change, dates or marries, buys a vehicle, etc., without seeking for God's direction is asking for big trouble. So seek God for the little things as well as the large things in our life. You really think that you are so smart and worldly wise that you could plunge into life's complications without God's guidance. Moving on, how often our plans are not God's plans at all? Ahab eventually did not think about asking for God's direction, for he was not a man who loved and obeyed God. He was asking for his knowledge or his decision to be made by his yes men. Well, he wanted to go, obviously. He brought it up. He wanted to go to Ramoth Gilead and get that back. So that was his desire. That was his quest. He wanted that. So do you think he was going to be happy if they had gone against him? No. Probably would have been 400 heads in the gallows, is what I'm thinking. So here we have one person that has a conscience. And that one person, actually 2 people that have a conscience, because Jehoshaphat had one as well. Otherwise, he would not have suggested. His conscience was pricked a little bit to, okay, I'll go, but let's find out what God really has to say first. Ahab then called for his 400 prophets. I highlighted that because, again, throughout the Old Testament, very seldom did we have more than one prophet operating at a time. Elijah and Elisha may have been one of those, but most of the time we only read about, and one prophet is highlighted, if you would. These were men that he had hired to serve as prophets of Baal and as advisors to the king. There you go. He hired them. They were paid prophets. Do you think Micaiah was a paid prophet? No. I'm sure his all that he had came from the Lord. He wasn't paid by any man, because that would have been tarnishing those decisions or those prophecies. When the 400 men gathered, Ahab asked them if they were going to go battle or not. They all with one accord. You didn't have 399 saying yes and one saying no. They were all yes men, every single one of them. Now Jehoshaphat had been around long enough to know what kind of men these were, and he did not trust them one bit. That's the conscience, that's the divine knowledge. He knew that they would say whatever Ahab wanted them to say because they were not God's prophets at all. He did not feel comfortable in making his decision based solely on the word of these 400 so-called prophets. So he said, Ahab, isn't there a prophet of God that we can ask about this? Is there not a man of God? He knew that not everyone who claims to speak for God really does. Some say whatever they want to say and professing it to be the words of God. When you truly want God's guidance, you must seek for it in the right places, just what I brought up a little earlier. God's will, seeking God's will. You're not going to find it in a fortune teller. You're not going to find it in a horoscope. You're not going to find it in the stars. You're not going to find it in, it says here, Dear Abby. I don't even know if that's out there anymore. I don't think Dear Abby's around. I think maybe this was written longer back than I could remember or that I referred to earlier. So, but anyway, and it's funny because I saw an ad on TV somewhere. Maybe it was on the phone. I can't recall. And it was basically it was for selling something or promoting something. And in the ad it said, if you act now, it's like the last one goes on for about a month, if you act now, you'll also receive a deck of tarot cards and a reading of some kind. And I'm thinking, I just saw that just the other day. So there you go. Talk about false prophecy, right? A lot of people, listen, you would be shocked at the number of people who make their decision by going to some mystic, some madam, some sister, Sister Joanne or something like that. I was going to say Sister Mary, but I didn't want to. But seriously, there is, I go to Georgia to hunt, and on the way back, there is a little sign on the side of the road. I've seen it for umpteen years. Sister Mary or something, readings and stuff. But there are people, you talk about false prophets, you talk about Satan's false prophets. That's where they're at, okay? Tarot card readings, reading your palm, If they read my palm, most of the time they're just going to find some cracks and stuff and maybe some grease I couldn't get out, But people actually believe in that. Oh, that's your lifeline. No, my lifeline is determined by God Almighty and nobody else. That's my lifeline, okay? I don't have a lifeline determined. You're not going to tell God how long I'm living, because the Bible says, we're not promised tomorrow, but no man knows when God's going to come back, and no man knows his exact moment that he's going to leave this place. Yes, sister? Yeah, there you go. Well, that was the case with this guy. He wanted to get approval for his desire. He didn't care about where it came from, as long as it was what he wanted to hear. So, and along the same token, something I did want to bring up, and many of you know from before when I used to teach a little bit more, is I appreciate your feedback. I want your feedback. This is a class, okay? It's a little preaching, a little teaching, hopefully, but this is a class. And if you have questions or contributions to this, come on, because I ain't all that smart, and I need help. So please. So this guy here, he sends his servant. All right, listen, he wants to hear from Micaiah. I'll tell you what, go get Micaiah and bring him here. Now here's where it gets interesting, all right? Even the messenger sent to get Micaiah was quite impressed with the show. And with the show they're talking about is this one, you can see this guy was looking for attention, okay? This one prophet, Zedekiah, took horns of iron and began illustrating his prophecy. So it wasn't enough that he wanted to, I guess maybe he wanted to step forth to be the forefront of the 400 or something. He wanted to show, listen, okay, we all agree, but I'm going to show you something today. So he got these horns, he fashioned them out of iron, he made them, I guess, I don't know. Maybe he was a blacksmith or something. And he took the horns and he held them up by his head and marched around, saying, Thus saith the Lord, with these shalt thou push the Syrians until thou hast consumed them. He put on quite a show. I would have, if I was $3.99, I'd be laughing, okay? And maybe they were in awe. Obviously, Ahab thought it was just a wonderful thing, because he's grabbing these horns by his head and he's parading around, saying, with these you're going to push the Syrians back. He should have known by now the Syrian army was just a little tougher than that. So, and the other prophets. Then the others joined in with one accord and began crying out, Go up and prosper. It sounded like an unanimous decision, but they had not yet heard from the only one that really was a prophet and the voice of God in this. So he sends his servant to go get Micaiah. He gets Micaiah. I don't know if he was afraid for Micaiah or afraid for himself or whatever, but he starts talking to him on the trip in. He got him alongside here. He says, okay, listen, the king wants to talk to you, all right? And then he starts to tell him, make it good. So what he's saying is, should just go along with them and not make trouble. Now, maybe he was afraid for Micaiah's life. Maybe he was afraid, listen, if you go against this, you've got 400 plus the king. If you go against them, this may not go well for you. And it didn't in some aspects of it. But the pressure to compromise is intense. So we talked about compromise last week, Brother George did, and we're still on that subject, pertaining this time to, don't compromise because you have a conscience. Use that conscience. So he tells them, why do you have to keep preaching like that? Don't you know you're the only one who believes that anymore? So there was a pressure there. No one else teaches that way. And no one else is advising the king that way. So don't go against the king. Don't do it. It's not a good idea, Maybe he was concerned for Micaiah's life. Maybe he was concerned for his own life. Maybe he just wanted to make sure this all went smoothly. So he didn't want any trouble. And so you see that a lot now. It talks about big congregations. I don't often watch those shows on TV. Some of you probably might do, and we don't stand in judgment. But I can tell you this: I watched some gospel concert, and I liked the man singing. I liked the message of the songs. I liked everything about it except for one thing. It was more than entertaining. I think gospel music can be entertaining in some instances, and should have some form of entertainment if you're in a concert, but also more toward the ministry side. I guess the gospel sing we had last week would be really evident. I found it very entertaining, but I found it very, very godly, very spiritual, and very ministry. It wasn't just entertainment. So you've probably all seen it, but you see it mostly in like these big rock concerts and everything else, and in worldly, I'd say worldly music, But I saw this concert, and the guy had big fireworks going off behind him, and smoke machines, and it was a great song. And as a matter of fact, I sing a couple of his songs, but it was also it was attention getting, and I think it was a compromise with ministering. As it should have been just ministering maybe with some entertainment, but this was a compromise more toward the entertainment side. Like I want to do what's right, but I want this as well. I believe if that person had gone to God and sought God's wisdom, I don't think those shows would be like that. Just a side note there. So, anyway, they use the people that are away from those big shows, those big televangelists and stuff like that. Oftentimes, they stand alone. Oftentimes, they're outspoken, but are drowned out by the mob of those that are not, those that seek attention more than ministry. By contrast, they usually stand alone. Those people. Not that they are the only ones who still believe it, but we who do hold the truth are so spread apart that in our individual lives we often stand alone against sin and worldliness. And you'll see that even in your job and stuff, Why don't you go ahead and take a break? Mm-hmm. And we share that. Mm-hmm. That's true. But I'm sorry, the verses escape me. I think I spoke on it once before. But who knows? But the husband may be saved by the actions of the wife, or the wife by the husband, or the children. So sometimes I think it makes you more resolved, though, because like Brother Jamie spoke many times, the eyes are on you. You are a standout, just like Micaiah was a standout. The eyes are on you. As a servant of God, we often stand alone. I can honestly say that for the first time in many, many, many years, I've identified several Christians at work, but now I found one or two that are more vocal about it. There was one guy, he actually moved back up to Vermont to be with his family. But I think you're absolutely right. Oftentimes we are the only ones, all my children, my grandchildren, her sisters and stuff. They know the way. They know. But it makes you have more resolve to stand alone. And I want to tie that to today's lesson, because Micaiah was a standalone. He was one of, let's say he was one of 401, okay? And he was a standalone. But he did not compromise. And he certainly had a conscience for God. And I think and that's a very good point, I think as Christians, we have to maintain that, I work with a very difficult guy right now. It's very, very difficult. I kid people. I said, I got the job, I said, because I had been an overnight manager. I'm working in freight now, and something I've done now for about the last, 9-10 months or so. I'm working in the receiving department, handling a lot of freight and stuff. And nobody else applied for this job. They had to get a waiver from HR because you have to interview 3 people for each job. And nobody else applied for the job. And so I went and I said, what is it? They said it's 10 to 2, Monday through Friday. I think I was knocking the ceiling tiles off. Pick me. And they did. And they had to go out with the HR and get a waiver. But anyway, and now I'm working a little bit later than I'm used to, and I go in a little earlier on Mondays. But anyway, so the days are a little longer. But nonetheless, I said when I went part-time, I'd never work another Sunday. And since coming back to the Lord, and I have been able, with God's blessing, to do that. But anyway, this guy's pretty difficult. And he's always throwing innuendos out there. And you got to be very, very careful what you say, even in complete innocence of the conversation or the statement or the phrase, because if there's a speck of innuendo available, he will grab it and turn it into either something sexual or whatever. He's just got that going on, and he can't seem to drop it. But I stand my ground. I said, Jeff, I said, you know who I am and what I do, but I think sometimes it just takes a while. I went many, many years ago where anybody who's been in a workplace, you're going to encounter people that are not just not Christians, but they're pretty hard to work with. They've got their innuendos, they've got the comments, they've got their personality, and they're going to throw it out there at you. This gentleman, and I probably shared this once before, but I'm going to do it real quick so I can get back on track. This gentleman would take a Playboy magazine, young guy when I was in the Navy, young guy before I was married, and hey, look at that. What do you think about that? Back then you could smoke. And he smoked cigars. Yeah. In your face. This man knew more cuss words than I'd ever heard in my life before. And he just continued on and on and on and on every day. I was a young Christian. So I hadn't had an opportunity to backslide yet. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to just be talking about God and everything all the time. I kid people. I said I didn't know. I wasn't supposed to tell my Catholic mother about it. Really, that didn't go too well. But anyway, so to finish this story up about a standalone person like Micaiah, we had a little Church of God. It was a mobile chapel. I think it sat 3 on one side and 2 on the other. In the back was a pastor's office that was probably about this big. There were 2 bathrooms, probably about this big. And so, but you know what? It was a great little church. I'd been Baptist and assemblies a little bit, and then we settled in there. My wife and I walked in. His name was Bill Lee, and we talked about Saul. We talked about Paul. We walked in, and there was Saul and his wife sitting in a Church of God. And I'm going to tell you, so I'm just recounting that. I think I got a shiver going from my feet right up to my head. They had gotten saved. They had gotten saved and became very close friends. very close friends. So you hold the fort, you hold the line, and don't compromise. And you never, never know what God will do. As long as you stand, as long as you don't waver, as long as you know what, the minute there's a chink in that armor of God, Satan via these people will take advantage of it, and your testimony is gone, shot, and it takes a while to rebuild that. It really does. So you're right, stand. But the minute your testimony is shot out because you have opened up that, you've dropped a piece of the armor down, and you've shown a chink in the armor, a weakness, a hole, a defect, if you would. They will take advantage of that, and your testimony could be either destroyed or considerably damaged. So, in this case, I was thankful that I held the ground. And like I said, we walked in, and there was Bill and Peggy Lee, my Saul, had turned into a Paul. And it was amazing, amazing thing. So, let's get back on track here, because one thing I've learned from George: never finish the lesson on time. Actually, I have a few times. So we move on down. When he came before the kings, Ahab asked him if he should go to battle or not. Micaiah first replied, "Go and prosper." Well, even Ahab knew that this was a contrary to Micaiah's normal line of thought. So he said, well, wait a minute. That ain't right. I told you before, tell me the truth. I don't know why he said that, because he obviously never wanted to hear the truth. But in this case, maybe because Jehoshaphat's sitting over here, he wanted to, appease that aspect of it. So in verse 14, Micaiah tells the messenger he's going to give God's words regardless of what he says. So he told him that. He says, listen, he says, I will go ahead, and whatever the Lord saith. This is in 1 King. Again, they don't give you all the verses, but they refer to them. And 22:14, what the Lord saith unto me, that will I speak. Nothing more, nothing less. So first he kind of throws out a teaser out there. Oh yeah, go ahead, you're good. And even Ahab says, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Not coming from this guy, right? So 1 John 4:1 says to try the spirits, whether they are God. To try the spirits. And again, so when you're seeking your advice, stay out of the Dear Abbeys, stay out of the local, help, help with your major decisions. Of course, tarot cards and all that. But so go and prosper. Ahab was not a total idiot. I like that. I like you put that in there. He was an idiot. He just wasn't a total idiot. So, and Micaiah was being sarcastic, not telling him the truth. Notice in verse 16, Ahab demanded of Micaiah, tell him the truth. He asked for the truth, so Micaiah gave it to him in verse 17 and told him that if he went to battle, Israel would be scattered like sheep without a shepherd. He's upset. Then he's upset when he heard it and says, he turns around to Jehoshaphat, see, I told you he would prophesy evil to me. No, he prophesied truth to you, whether you like to hear it or not. He always does that. He never tells me what I want to hear. Moving on. If you've already decided you want to do in a certain situation, if the Word of God condemns your course of action, you must sacrifice your plans and submit. Proverbs 1:24-26. Because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand and no man regarded, but ye have set at naught all my counsel, and with none of my reproof. I will laugh at your calamity, and I will mock when your fear cometh. In other words, listen, either listen to me or you don't. If you don't listen to God's prophecies, if you don't listen to God's word, you're going to bear the cost of that. And it could be considerable. Ahab's confidence was shaken, and he disguised himself for battle. So he had 400 people telling him it's going to be all right. He had one telling him it's not going to be all right. And he started thinking about it. And he said, you know what? What if? What if this guy is right? So he disguised himself. And he sends Jehoshaphat out there, some friend, right? You go on out there, get in there. There's our time, first bell. Ahab's confidence is taken, but not. He can hid himself from the Syrians. Now this is God. Listen to this. I love this. I do some archery hunting, and I can tell you right now, it's not easy to be accurate as it is with a rifle. Okay. He hid himself from the Syrians, not from God. A man shot his bow without even aiming at anything. It said just by chance. He just right in the middle of his back. So he was wounded. He died in his chariot. There was within every man a God-given conscience, a conscience that is the inner voice within us, will assure us what is right and warns us what is wrong. Again, seek God's counsel on decisions in your life. Yes, sister. I know where you're going with this, yeah. Jehoshaphat did go. He had promised him, he says, listen, my men are your men, my horses are your horses, all my strength, all my assets, all my army is yours. And so he kind of made a promise. Maybe he should have listened to Micaiah first, then maybe he wouldn't have made that promise to Jehoshaphat, to Ahab, to give him all those resources. Absolutely. Absolutely. Peer pressure is big with kids. Big with kids. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And in this case here, and sure enough, he died, and so it was prophesied that the sheep would be without a shepherd. In other words, you're the shepherd of this country, and you're going to be wiped out. God told you that, but did he listen? No, he didn't listen. So the conscience, the inner voice within us, that assures us what is right and warns us of what is wrong. So we have some overriding the conscience. Moses saw the Egyptians smiting an Israelite. He looked this way and that. What's that tell you? I want to make sure nobody's seeing it. So if you're afraid somebody's going to see you doing something, it's probably wrong. He killed the Egyptian and overrid the conscience. Samson, all right, enough said about him. He had a weakness for the women, and that got him in serious trouble. Got him dead eventually. Lost his eyes, lost his freedom, lost, as I was saying earlier, lost his witness, lost his testimony. All the great things he had done for God, now he's just in prison because he bowed down, laid down the lap of a woman. She seduced him. Bam. His conscience told him otherwise. And you know why I know his conscience was telling him otherwise? Because he lied to her, 3 times, I think? I think it was 3 times. He lied to her. So he lied to her because his conscience was telling him, hey, listen, this isn't a good idea. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And finally, what happened? She overtook the conscience with him. Judas, well, enough said. Judas definitely overrode his conscience. He knew what he was doing wrong. So much so that after he got the money, the glitter of gold, silver, the glitter of silver in his eyes overrode everything. But then what happened? His conscience kicked back in. He went out. He was so burdened with his conscience that he committed suicide, killed himself. there you have it. Obey your conscience. It's God-given.